we've been out and looked at the fields. Are there any other things that we should be looking at, or desk-based study that we should do before we start compiling our risk map?
Well, the first thing really to look at before you finish the map off is to see whether or not the fields lie over a groundwater protection zone. All of England is now mapped, and it's possible to get the information off the Environment Agency website, and that will enable you to tell whether or not the fields lie over a groundwater protection zone.
And if they do lie over a groundwater protection zone, what are the consequences of that?
You could affect local groundwaters with nutrients.
Local groundwaters being?
Boreholes and local authority water extraction points. If you're over one of these inner zones, the red areas, the drawdown time on those is quite short. So you will affect local groundwater quality if you stock pigs over the top of those red areas.
Okay, so when we're compiling our map, how do we take these into account?
The key things to take into account are the soil type, and as we've seen this morning, the sandier the better, the location and the slope. A good idea to mark them on the map so that you know the potential pathway and the potential receptor of any slopes or any potential runoff. It's also possible then to colour code the fields depending on their risk factor. So in the case of this map, green would be low risk, yellow would be medium, and orange would be high risk. And then we've subdivided the high risk down to very high risk, so you can see that the red hatched areas are locally very high risk areas that we may choose not to stock with pigs because it may not be possible to manage out the risks that they present. At the same time, you can also tell from the map whether there are any water courses, roads, houses, anything that might be in the pathway of potential runoff, and try and avoid those sites or those fields.
Okay, and what about things like habitat sites, nature sites, etc.? How do they influence?
It's worth checking before you take on a block of fields that they're not lying next to something like a triple SI. If they do lie next to something that's got an important designation, then you're going to need to be doubly sure that you can manage out any of the risks to make sure that any of the activities in the pig operation are not going to be to the detriment of the environment.
And are there things that we can learn from the map about the locality?
Yes, certainly. You can tell whether or not you're on a floodplain or next to a floodplain. You can check the connectivity to roads, and if you've marked the slopes on them, that should tell you potentially where any runoff could end up.
Okay, and things like public footpaths, how do they affect us?
It's always worth avoiding public footpaths. They certainly shouldn't be stocked with paddocks. And the other important thing to bear in mind is that none of the surface water from the field should affect the footpath.
And fields that are above us, do we need to consider those?
It's not a good idea to stock pigs onto a field that's taking water from another arable field. If you're taking water from a crop that's lying upslope from you, then it's something that you've got to deal with on your site, and it may be that you're setting up a chain reaction. And to go back to the source, the pathway and the receptor, you are being the receptor then for runoff from another field.
Okay, and down here I see we've got a road and we're going to have a gateway in there. Are there specific things you suggest we should do around gateways, or should we look to try and find new entrances?
Generally, if you can bund the gateway so that farm traffic is having to travel upwards to go out of the field onto the road, that's an advantage. Gateways that slope down onto roads are always going to be at risk of taking runoff out onto the road because the surface water is going to follow the wheeling. So anything you can do to either move a gateway further up a hill or bund it off so that traffic's having to travel upwards to go down onto the road will be an advantage.
Okay, thank you. So now we've got all these things, we have to compile a map, and then what do we do following from that?
From that map you can then draw up a management plan for the field for the intended stocking period. You can colour code the field so that you know exactly the risk factor you're dealing with, and from that then you can plan to try and manage out those higher risks. And that might be through not stocking the whole field, it might be through installing buffer strips. There's a whole arsenal of techniques that you can use to try and manage out some of the higher risks.
Okay, thank you for that. So it looks like we've got quite a lot of work to be doing.
It does, and now the crops are off the field, it's a good time to start.
Thank you.